Welcome to episode 143 of We Don't Die Radio, where my goal is to give you evidence that although our bodies will disappear, we survive physical death. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And before we start the show, I'd like you to imagine something. Imagine that you're sitting in a big audience and everyone around you is interested in life after death. And you see a few dozen people come to the stage, and each one of them brings cutting-edge information about the afterlife and how you can get reconnected to your loved one. How does that sound? I think it sounds pretty good, and such an event actually exists. I want to invite you. I am one of the speakers at the Afterlife Research and Education Symposium, which is held this September in 2017, September 15th through 17th at the Embassy Suites in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I'd love to meet you face to face, and I think it's going to be a great time and filled with great information. So you can go to afterlifestudies.org to find out more and to register. Now, speaking about afterlife communication, I'm thrilled to introduce you to our guest today. His name is Bill Guggenheim, and his name might be quite familiar to you, same as his book, which he co-wrote with his former wife Judy, called Hello from Heaven. It's been sitting on my bookshelf and one of my favorites since I started my afterlife research my research started in the late 90s. This book, Hello from Heaven, has been translated into 18 languages and continues to be a bestseller. Bill is a pioneer in the field of after-death communication experiences. Now, after-death communication is also called ADC. He is considered to be the father of ADC research and has written and spoken on this subject for more than 27 years. Bill has been presenting ADC workshops at conferences, bereavement support groups, hospices, churches, colleges, and many other places. His ADC research and Hello from Heaven have been featured on numerous radio and television shows, including ABC's show 2020. So without further ado, I'd like to say, Bill Guggenheim, welcome to We Don't Die Radio.
I'm delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you. Really, really thank you. And thank you most of all for all the years and all the work you and Judy have done to make such a difference with so many people.
It was 7 years of research and writing, which I never anticipated, because if I had, I think I would have bailed out in about 6 months into it.
Wow. Well, tell us about how it all started. I mean, what's your background about? Tell us your background is what I'm trying to say.
My background, I'm from Long Island, Manhattan, in New York City and New Jersey, and grew up there and went to school there, Yale University, things like that. But mainly I was a stockbroker and a securities analyst, literally on Wall Street. I worked for two small firms, which has nothing to do with this, but that's my orientation. I inherited money when I was 21, and I wanted to learn how to manage it. That's why I studied a whole bunch of courses and eventually worked in the field. But Judy and I moved to Florida. We had one son at that time, and I had a spiritual awakening in 1974 that led me to attend a 5-day workshop with somebody very, very famous. That's Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Wow.
She wrote all the books, the early books on death and dying.
Yes.
And this workshop was held in 1977. And it was just a series of coincidences, if there are such things. There really aren't. But I happened to be watching her on the Phil Donahue show one day. Judy called me in to see her. And I had heard her name, but I didn't know who she was. And I watched for an hour, and she really spoke about near-death experiences, which I was a bit familiar with. I had read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which was published in 1975, and I knew some people involved with that research and things like that. But I didn't, this didn't change my life or anything at all. I just watched it, and then coincidentally, the same show came on another cable channel when we were living in Sarasota 2 weeks later, and in that show, it had her name and mailing address below. So feeling kind of magnanimous at the moment, I wrote a check to support her work. Great big check, $25. What you might do if the Brownie Scouts came around, or the fire department, or any other, house-to-house charity call kind of thing. And I thought I did my good deed for the day, and that would be the end of it. But as it turned out, Elizabeth wrote back to me, sent me a number of audio cassette tapes called Lessons from the Dying Patient, and invited me to attend a 5-day workshop with her. And I didn't know anything about it. So I waited up to the last day before registration. And I felt, well, if I went, then probably a doctor or a nurse or a social worker or, somebody in the medical profession would not be able to attend if I went. So I called her office in Illinois to speak to her secretary, I thought, and I was going to apologize and say very much, thank you very much for inviting me, but really, give my seat away. Don't hold a place for me for somebody who could make a bigger difference in the field of death and dying. And however, that particular day it was snowing in Illinois, and Elizabeth answered her own phone, and wow. I recognized her voice immediately. So putting this into context, imagine calling some movie star or somebody like that, and Jennifer Aniston, and you get her right on the phone.
Right.
Boom, it's her. It's not, a machine or, somebody else that works there, but it was Elizabeth. So I went through my little routine about thank you for inviting me, but, and she listened patiently, and then she simply said, Bill, in her German Swiss accent, Bill, I think you should be there. And I point out, I guess I'm a pushover for dominant women, because I said, well, Elizabeth, if you think so, I will. And 6 months later, sure enough, I was there for 5 days. It was not, the workshop was not about death and dying. It was about life and living, and people releasing their grief, their pain, their sorrow, all kinds of things, not just death, but having been abused, having been this, that, or the other throughout life, all the different human emotions. And we bonded so much that by the end of the workshop, we all wanted to just call our immediate family members and friends and go off to an island together and never go back to reality.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so incredibly loving. I've never experienced in a group the love we shared in those few days, which built throughout the workshop.
Terrific.
However, the big point is that on that Thursday evening, she flew Raymond Moody down from Virginia to Florida, where the workshop was, to speak to us. And he spoke about his near-death experience, research and whatnot in his book. And a couple of people, or 3 people, talked about they had one of those. Then it went into another direction where a woman claimed that her daughter had been hit and killed by a driver of a car accidentally when the daughter was out walking with a friend. So both these 2 teenage girls were killed. And she had what she called a dream in which she saw her daughter and conversed with her. And the dream was very, very healing. It had occurred about a year before, and this woman was a nurse herself, and she accepted it fully as being authentic and real and an actual contact from her daughter. And then she went on to say how her son had seen his sister while he was doing his homework one evening, which scared him, and he went running into the living room and saying, Kathy's there, and he described what she was wearing and whatnot. Wow. And I had never heard of anything like this before, ever. It just, anyone who had died my phrase was, when you're dead, you're dead. And the body is like a flashlight battery. When the juice runs out, you throw it away.
Wow.
And those were my views. So I was very skeptical about this. And I thought it was very nice that the mother had a dream, but when she called it a dream, I dismissed that as being not real. And when the boy gave his account of seeing his sister, I figured teenage boy, little marijuana, who knows what, probably a drug reaction, and threw that one away. But then Elizabeth went on to narrate a story in which a patient of hers had died 10 months earlier, came back to Elizabeth, and made Elizabeth make a promise that she would not quit her work, because there was a great deal of pressure on Elizabeth at that point, opposition by the medical community to stop doing what she was doing, even though she worked in a hospital and everything.
Wow. And
she was a full-fledged American psychiatrist at that point, although her background was from Switzerland. And when Elizabeth finished her long story, which is in our books, I'm not going to go through it, you could literally hear a pin drop. It would have sounded like a crowbar falling on a concrete floor or something. It was so dramatic. And so I went home with the idea, well, if it happened to one person, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who had everything to lose and nothing to gain by telling this experience, I felt, maybe it's happened to some other people. Now, back then in 1977, 78, late 70s, throughout the 80s, there was no internet or anything like it. It was the interlibrary loan system. So I was able to get books from anywhere in the country that I could locate, or, a title of it, an author or whatever. And so I would get a book here and a book there, and there'd be one account or two accounts, or maybe three, of something like this. And one had a whole chapter on it, out of all the books that had ever been written, one had a chapter. And I was curious, and I didn't know what to do about it, but I went to Raymond Moody, who I had gotten to know myself, again, the father of near-death experience research. And I figured if he wrote the book, it would get attention. And while Raymond never said no, he never said yes, and he kept postponing me for years. And I even found a man who he worked with up in Georgia who would find people to interview. So the three of us would work together, but it never happened. And I finally had an experience of hearing a voice in my own head say, do your own research, write your own book. It's your spiritual work to do. And so it was back on me. And I didn't know. I mean, I could figure out what to do, yes, but I had never done it. And that was very simply find people who had had some kind of experience of being contacted by a loved one who would die and interview them. That was my methodology, very simple. And I called my former wife to come over. We had been married 17 years. We were divorced for 4 years. But I had shared all my information and interest in this with her before we were divorced and even afterwards. And so she did. And even that day when she was there for an hour, we got a phone call from somebody telling us about an account of this woman's aunt seeing a friend of hers who had died and having the experience before she was even informed that the friend had died.
Wow.
That was at least evidential.
Sure.
That's what I really wanted to supply, something which could convince me that these weren't just imagination or wishful thinking,
right,
or bereaved desire of the bereaved, that kind of thing. And long story short, in our book we did have 6 chapters of why are these real, and I'll go through that later. But it provides evidence within the experience, not just reading it, but the content of it, how they learn, what they learn, and whatnot. That they learned something they didn't know before, or before they were told a loved one had died, things like that. So with that, I plunged ahead. My job was to find 10 people a week here in Orlando, Florida, and I did, who would claim to have such an experience. And because I didn't know if we'd find 50 people in a year or 100 in a year. Mm-hmm. Long story short, we interviewed 500 people the very first year.
Wow.
And that led to being in contact with various bereavement organizations, asking them to help us by providing people who were grieving the death of a loved one, especially bereaved parents. Mm-hmm. And we gave our first lecture, workshop, whatever you want to call it, 1 year after we began our research, which we began in 1988 through 1995. But 1989, we gave our first workshop with over 300 people in it, all bereaved parents.
Wow.
And a second one the same day with more than 200 bereaved parents in it. And because another little coincidence, I had met a woman who was a reporter for the St. Petersburg Times. She was there, and she brought a cameraman. So we had a wonderful, beautiful article over in the St. Petersburg newspaper that was written with a color photograph. And we used that as evidence that our research was real and honest and straightforward. And we used that throughout the rest of our 6 years of research whenever we contacted anybody, individuals or organizations. So we had, and there were other stories in other newspapers, including the Orlando Sentinel had 2 in there. So we got a great deal of publicity before our book was ever published.
Fantastic.
And we just kept going and going and going. We kept hearing of more and more experiences, so we didn't stop. And we wound up interviewing 2,000 people in all 50 American states and all 10 Canadian provinces. And all backgrounds, all interests, all different relationships, everything. And that's in the book. And Hello from Heaven contains 353 first-hand accounts that we put in the book that are representative of all the others we heard. And
how did you pick the 353 out of 2,000?
Wow.
Basically,
they fall into categories. We found 12. Sounds like the Zodiac, the 12 categories. Actually, there are one or two more now, but then there were 12. They just fell into ones, such as feeling or sensing the presence, or hearing a voice, or feeling a touch, a tactile touch, a pat, a tap, a caress, a kiss, something like that, or smelling a fragrance of some kind, or actually seeing them, on and on and on. They fall into patterns of types of experiences, and within those we found the ones that were the clearest and easiest to understand, and the best told, frankly, verbally, and that edited down to a reasonable amount of space in a book. And yes, it was a lot of hard choices, but we had to, not have a 1,000-page book, because we knew nobody would read that.
No, I love how your passion brought you through this, and then even hearing all the stories, you start realizing, hey, these fall into different categories.
Yeah, well, again, it was just organizing. I was a stock market analyst. You look for trends, you look for, you look for patterns. And there were patterns to these. And there are patterns all throughout life, within nature, within everything, within music, within movies, everything. You look for patterns, that's all. And we found patterns very easily, very quickly. Anybody can do that. And many other books have been written since then, which have done the same thing.
What are some of these 12, if you don't mind?
That's what I was saying. Hearing a voice, or sensing a presence, or feeling a touch, these types of things. We go on to later into, of course, people call them dreams. We call them sweepstate ADCs because they're very common. But they're not people will go through a whole experience. They use the word dream, but then they'll finish by saying, but it was unlike any other dream I ever had. Because they saw the person, they communicated usually, it was detailed, it was personal, it was comforting, uplifting, and even other people in their dreams, there were a group of people, didn't see that person, only they did. So there are unique little twists and turns within many of these.
Bill, do you have any... Sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead, sure.
Do you have any stories of ADCs that continue to just, like when you think about them, back in the day when you heard them, you just like, there's no doubt this is reality. Any stories you could share with us?
Well, a couple of them? The best one, the easiest one is the one I had. And that was before we ever began the research. Judy and I owned a home in Longwood, Florida, which is a suburb of Orlando. And one Sunday afternoon, we had a talk. We were in our living room, which is in the front of the house. And we had gotten up each to go on and do whatever it was the rest of that Sunday. And I heard a thought in my mind very clearly. It said, go outside and check the swimming pool. It's very common in Florida for people to have swimming pools. And you don't have to be a millionaire or anything like it. I mean, you look from the air, it's hard to find in some areas and some suburban areas, houses that don't have pools.
Right.
That's how common they are. So we had an average-sized screened-in pool. And so I walked from the front of the house to the rear, which had sliding glass doors. And between us and the pool, we had about 15 feet away, there was a wrought iron fence. And the gate had been left open. And we had 3 sons at that point. And two of the older ones used to use that as a shortcut to go to the backyard. So from the back door through the gate to the pool and around the pool to another door outside the pool. And so I went to close the gate. And as I did, I happened to look down at the deep end of the pool. And there, our youngest son, Jonathan, was floating and not moving at all in the deep end. And I didn't know if he was dead or alive.
Wow.
He was only less than 2 years old. He didn't know how to swim. And I tore off from where I was, from the deep end of the pool down to the other end. or the other way around, whatever. I tore off to the other end of the pool. And for some reason, I stood there just for a moment to take my shoes off. I don't know where. I used to be a volunteer fireman, and I learned that before you go into water, you take your shoes off. Okay, so I ripped them off, and just before I jumped in the water, Jonathan was floating face upwards. His arms were akimbo, and he spread out with his legs. His eyes were open, and he wasn't moving, but he had almost like a small smile on his face, right, in my memory. And so I jumped in the water. I came up under him, pushed him to the side, and while I'd been running down the side, I yelled out, "Judy!" I screeched out, "Judy!" And she came running immediately, and she literally pulled him out. I pushed him, and she pulled him. We both got out. It was May. The water was still cold. I was shivering a bit. We didn't know what yet, and within a few seconds, he spit up water, and he was fine. He did not even require CPR. That's how quickly this had occurred.
Thank goodness.
And if I had not been alerted with the words, go outside and check the swimming pool, and then in a chapter where people's lives are saved by these experiences, this is just one. Other people are saved by their experiences. But it's always indirectly. It never says, stop, there's an accident. You're going to be in an accident, or stop, you'll be killed. Stop, you'll be. It's always indirect. It will say, slow your car down, or stop your car now, but it doesn't explain why. And then for instance, another time, this has nothing to do with an after-death communication, but when Judy and I were separated and divorcing, I was depressed one day, and I was just sitting at a red light, which was a four-way intersection, and when the light changed green, rather than moving ahead immediately, which most of us do, because I was depressed, I was slow, but a tractor trailer went from my right to my left, and would have broadsided me at full speed. He just never saw the light. He didn't slow down. He didn't speed up. He just never saw it. And that happens, everywhere.
Sure.
People don't see traffic lights. And so that was just an emotional thing, but this was a verbal thing of receiving a message to check the pool. And other people in Hello from Heaven have received messages to look out and check the barn. In that case, the barn was on fire and would have spread to the house. Or don't board that airplane. And then later on, the plane crashes.
Wow.
They're not told the plane will crash. Don't get on that plane. So if your listeners don't believe a word I say, that's up to them at all. But if you ever receive information about slow down now, or stop your car now, or anything like that, please be good about it and listen to that voice and heed it, because it will probably save your life, or at least prevent you from having a serious accident.
Oh, I studied years ago with Doreen Virtue, who's known to many as Angel Lady and everything. And her story, she had said that she had gotten a premonition of a carjacking, and exactly was given detailed of what to do and what not to do. And she was a psychologist, I think, but she just blew it off that it had to be a figment of her imagination, and didn't listen. And of course, it all happened just the way she saw. And from that point forward, she started listening. Yes. Very interesting. So let's talk about a few other these kinds of after-death communications, because I think we can have them and not realize we're having them. Like, for instance, smelling my grandmother's perfume or something like that. That could be a very real communication, couldn't it?
It's a whole chapter in Hello from Heaven about that. You can smell a perfume, a cologne, a favorite food, a favorite beverage. Could be a sachet was reported. The scent of a baby can be reported. Anything to do with smelling something like that, and which makes them the most interesting in a way, because this is a category of all the types of experiences that other people can share and do share easily. So let's pretend you're calling me from northern Minnesota in the middle of a blizzard.
Okay.
Snow outside, no flowers anywhere, and you're working in an office in a big building, in a cubicle or whatever, and there's no flowers, and there's no cologne, there's no perfume of anything, and all of a sudden you start smelling lilacs, which may not even be a flower native to there. I don't know, but you smell lilacs, and lilacs remind you that was, you say, your mother's favorite flower when she was alive, and this, you just feel surrounded by lilacs and uplifted, and you feel a warm hug from your mother emotionally, and you say, "Thank you, Mom," or whatever. And somebody comes along and they go, sniff, sniff. Let's have smell. What is it? Oh, yes, it's flowers. Oh, it's lilacs. And they'll smell it. And a third person will come along, and a fourth and a fifth. So these, and we have one in which 11, plus some other, 12 people all smell the same roses when there are no roses there.
Wow.
So that's evidential when it's two or more people at the same time in the same place sharing the same experience.
Pretty cool.
Again, with no words involved, without anybody saying, "Oh, do you smell that?" Not prompting them or eliciting, "Oh, yes, yes," causing them to say yes, but they on their own noticing it and commenting on it.
Wow. Can we talk about telephone calls? I just want to share something that one of the listeners told me, that her dad had a close friend who had passed away. And I don't know how long it was after the guy had passed away, but this gentleman's cell phone rang, that it was from the guy who died. And of course, he couldn't have dialed it because, he was gone. So the fella just assumed that, well, somebody else must have gotten the number or something like that. So he dialed the number back, and the number had been disconnected.
Yes,
so,
yes,
yeah.
yes. This was just coming in as we were finishing our research, or we would have had more on that regarding cell phones, pagers, and computers. And people have received messages on their computers. And this is not an email from us, somebody trying to make them feel good or somebody's trying to spoof them. This is just a little message for them on a computer, or hearing. That's the extreme. I should go back to where we were, telephone calls. It's not uncommon. It's not the most common, but it's the smallest category. But one man wrote a whole book on it called Phone Calls from the Dead.
Wow.
He was a parapsychologist. And I read his book many years ago. But what it is imagine two forms. One is when you're asleep. Now, maybe you can accept it more easily that you're sleeping and the phone rings that you hear in your head and you pick it up and it's your aunt or your parent or your child or whatever it is. You can accept that more readily than actually seeing them in person or, during a so-called dream, sleep state, ADC, or whatever. And you have a two-way conversation with them by telephone and hang up, and that's that. Okay. But what about when you're wide awake? Let's say you're in the kitchen, you're cooking or cleaning up, or some other room of the house doing whatever you're doing. Doesn't matter, or wherever you are, it could be a business even. And the phone rings, you pick it up, and it's the voice of your loved one who died. And they communicate to you. They speak to you. And you can have one-way or two-way communication with them during this type or other types of experiences as well. But one or two-way communication. And generally their voice then begins to fade away, and that's the end of it. But there's never a hang-up or a disconnect sound or a dial tone. It just fades away. And in some cases, there can be, on like a cell phone, you can show the phone number, but if you dial it, it's not valid or whatever. But we have the whole chapter in the book on phone calls. Yes.
What's the most common kind of ADC?
The most common one is perhaps not the most interesting, because it's the hardest to imagine unless you've already felt it. But it's called feeling or sensing the presence. You just feel the person is around you or near you in your vicinity. And many people can point to where in the room, like over to my left or to my right or behind me, and they can report a change in temperature sometimes, occasionally. The temperature may rise or decline, sometimes drastically. And they will also know when that's no longer there, when the person is left. But they'll say, "Oh, that's Aunt Mary who just died," or "That's so-and-so." It's usually somebody who's not quite as close to them. And they say, "Well, I'm just I'm upset because I'm thinking about him or something like that. So that's why I imagined it. But really, they are feeling it. They know it. But because in our culture, we discard some of these things like that as not real. They throw it away. In other cases, it's maybe their deceased husband or wife or child. Those can go on for months and even years. And what we say very simply, it's not that they just want you to feel their presence. They're not just letting you know they're there. There's something you can do right here, right now, when you have that occur. And that is sit down, relax your body as much as you can. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, just like you're on after meditation, and open your mind and ask to receive a message. At first, your mind's just turning away, like usual mind chatter. But you should, in time, receive a message from them because they want to communicate with you. They want more than to just give you a fragrance for you to smell or a touch or things like that. They want to communicate something verbal. And there's a whole list of those I'll be happy to get into in a minute. Sure. But feeling the presence is the most common. And I would say the sleep state, so-called dream, is the second most common. And people, here's my analogy, because I do when I have a lot of time in the workshop. How hard is it to get hold of somebody today? You call them on the phone, you get voicemail.
Right. You
have to send them an email. You may or may not get back. They may or may not get back to you for a day or two. You call on and on and on, all these different ways. And yet we're further apart. I mean, the joke is about kids who can text, and they're doing it incessantly. But if you put the same kids in the same room together, they don't know what to say to each other.
I know.
None, by the way. They have no idea what to say with real words.
Right.
Out of their mouth. And so we're closer by texting and tweeting and all this, but we're further away from each other in terms of emotionality and heartfelt words than ever. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And our loved ones, and when I first got into this, I had so much fear of telling people that I was looking into life after death and looking for proof. And these are the things I came up with. Bill, I thought people were going to think I was crazy. So I kept my mouth shut. And I think so many people have had experiences and might be afraid to share.
That was the biggest surprise as we did our research, because people said to us, I had my experience 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago, and you're the first person I've ever told, or you're the first people we've told outside of my immediate family or friends. You're the third or fourth person. And so many people said that I knew our book, if nothing else, would validate their experiences for each other. And that's why we chose the format of having 353 first-hand accounts. It's not about Judy and Bill Guggenheim. And I don't care if we have PhDs. You're still not going to reach more people than by having the accounts and the experiences' own words, first-hand accounts, in other words, that they can read and decide for themselves, are these authentic or not? And that's what we wanted to do, and that's what we did. And books are not usually done this way, because there's very little of us in the book, and we're not trying to be the experts that say this means this and that means that, and of course, you must believe such and such. We wanted the readers to read these accounts and make their own objective opinion of what they thought it meant. And I loved, there's one comment, even on Amazon, this guy, I believe it was a man, who kept reading a book and then throwing it against the wall.
Oh my gosh.
With disgust, but then started to read it again, and he said he couldn't put it down.
Wow, there's such a battle in our minds, even as long as I've been involved with this. Little voice in my head sometimes tells me I'm losing my mind. None of it happened. I think we all can find, that we fight that negative voice.
You have to realize what we didn't really elaborate on, because we couldn't in our book, is what we regard as these types of experiences, or near-death experiences, things like this, as being weird or different or out there. Or they're called parapsychological, paranormal, and other words meaning not real, as far as true science goes. These occur in other parts of the world, such as Central and South America, parts of Europe, the Far East, especially the Philippines, where people have these experiences at night, we'll say, share them with their friends and family members the next day, openly and easily, and they're accepted fully. We're the ones with blinders on. We're the ones that don't accept what the rest of the world does accept. And it's all because our whole society is so scientifically oriented. It goes back to, at first the sun revolved around the earth, and that was disproven, and this was disproven, and that was disproven, and science gradually ascended to be the master of the truth. And if science okayed it, it was true. If they didn't okay it, it wasn't true. And now the latest thing is consciousness located in the brain, or is it outside of the brain, non-local consciousness? Where does consciousness exist? And things like this. But we don't realize we all were raised with the same religion. I'm not saying we're Catholics or Protestants or Jews or whatever, but there's another religion we were raised with from first grade or preschool on right through college and PhDs, and that is science. Science is a way of looking at Earth, life on Earth, and evaluating it in a certain way. And it's fine for physical matter. I'm not disputing it, and energy and those things, but it's no good for these areas.
Right.
But yet we attribute it as being infallible and having the last word on everything. And so we're the ones who are starving and fearful about death. I hear from many hospice people how many people die hanging on to life with their fingernails because of their religion and science. They're afraid that they're going to go to hell or to oblivion, one or the other. Take your choice.
That's a scary way to take your final breaths. Yes,
it is. And they look at and they act it and they speak it if they can speak, and that's the way they leave this planet, leave this life. And they don't have to. That's between science and some forms of religious belief. That's what they're left with. But other people's have typically, though, let me give you the positive. The positive is that many people, even if they've been in a coma, will for a few moments before they make their transition, they open their eyes, they sit up, they're smiling, they will sometimes mention or point or indicate that their deceased loved one or one or more loved ones are present, and have a big smile, and in a way saying, "I'll be with you in a moment," and then they take their last breath and they're gone. But they have a whole welcoming committee waiting for them and escorting them to the light.
That's awesome. That really is. I wonder how many people have these ADCs and they blow it off like it was just my imagination.
That I don't know, but I know it was much more prevalent than it is now.
Yeah,
fortunately, because a lot has happened since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did her research, and the books on near-death experiences, and our book, Hello from Heaven, and all the other books on after-death communication, and as I said earlier, and some on out-of-body experiences, and the number of celebrities that have come forward and shared their experiences in popular media. All these are chipping away at this really agnostic or atheistic viewpoint that there ain't no more.
And there sure is. How many people would you say have these experiences? More people than not, or do you have any idea?
Yes, there was a poll conducted that indicated, before we ever began our work, that indicated that there was around 44% of all Americans have had one, an after-death communication experience. Now, that's if you include all the population of now over 300 million. You're speaking of about 125 million people, about a third. I'm going to say a third, conservatively, have had one, a third of the population. But then take into account, many people have never been bereaved, certainly not young children.
Yes.
And many older people. They've never been that close to somebody who's died. Maybe it was a grandparent, but they just weren't that close to that grandparent or whoever. So they haven't dealt with this. They haven't had or if they had somebody had come back, they wouldn't have recognized him, or they would have blown it off very, very easily.
Wow.
Just discounted it. And that's sad, but it's the way it is.
Oh, it is. It definitely is. Can we, because I know I've spoken to people and they've heard stories of other people that get these communications. Is there something people can do to increase their chances? I mean, I know you said to be open, and I do think having a quiet mind and, like you said, asking for communication is important. But is there anything we can do or pay attention to differently to help have one?
What I say is, first of all, ask. Asking is a form of prayer, if you like that word or not. Mm-hmm. But asking is a form of being open. You're admitting there's something you would like. So ask the person who you'd like to hear from to come back to you in some form. So just ask, but with sincerity, not just off the top of your head. Okay, prove it to me. With a cynical bias. Yeah. I hear this going to happen now. You prove it to me, and maybe I'll consider it. No, that's not asking. I mean, asking with a sincere, open, loving heart. And maybe they want to give a message to somebody else and offer to be of service to them, to give the message to maybe their spouse or another child or whoever it may be. But asking is a form of being open, and it's a form of prayer, and it creates an openness in your mind, in your emotions, in the possible. What is possible? Because that's what we're talking about. What is possible? Mm-hmm. And it's amazing, as they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, here nobody has to be an atheist or agnostic. You don't have to tell anybody if it doesn't happen, or even if it does happen. You don't have to tell anybody. Mm-hmm. Just see what happens. Now, the other thing is, which is very positive, yes, learn how to meditate. But that takes time, a lot of time and devotion to that. And the third thing is, my son, Chris, and I are working on a course, which we haven't finished, but we're going to put on the internet in some way. That will be either very inexpensive or maybe free, I don't know which, but it'll be really learning how to go deeper and deeper and deeper into other levels of reality, so to speak. Same as meditation. It's a course of meditation, but we're not calling it that. Okay. It's the ADC course, and with all based upon guided imagery exercises. And we've already held it in person, but we did that just to see how we did. It was for our own feedback, and it went very well. We had about 25 people in the first course and over 55 in the second one, and a lot of people had some kind of experience during the day. But we're not trying to do this. We're not trying to do this as an in-person presentation, but rather just people could listen on the internet with earphones.
And you can get to many more people than if you were trying to get to people one-on-one in the group setting.
Right. And it's very, very draining and tiring and whatnot to do a full-day presentation, and you're renting hotel rooms, and you have to be concerned about so many things. There were moving tables and stuff at one point. Yeah. Ridiculous stuff. But
what I like about this world.
So we're doing that, and we want it to be as accessible as possible. And that's what we're working on. And we took a digression. We're working right now in the other room. My son is recording the basis of a guided imagery for forgiveness. And this is going to be a very powerful, very short little exercise. And it's from the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It's right in there, and we're using that.
Excellent.
And it's got nothing to do with us, and it's got nothing to do with money or fame or anything. I came across it, and I just want to have people who use it, because it's not only effective, but miracles occur when people forgive one another.
Yes.
Literally. And there's a beautiful exercise that when you forgive someone, you release a prisoner, and you find out you were the one who was in prison yourself. It's not about releasing the other person, releasing yourself. It's a form of self-healing. Forgiveness is self-healing. is what I'm trying to say.
I heard someone say once, holding resentment or not forgiving, it's like taking rat poison yourself, but waiting for the other person to die. You
Yes.
just, it eats you up inside.
Yes, it does.
Oh, I
Yes,
love it. And I'm a
exactly.
firm believer, Bill, that our job as being humans is to serve one another and make a difference for one another. So that's
Yes,
awesome. I'm looking forward to that. What I'm really excited about your work, your and Judy's work, is these ADCs are things we can do. I've spoken to tons of people on the show that are mediums, and then I get lots of reader or listeners that want to get in touch with their loved one, and they feel like they must go through a medium. And as great as mediums are, I think they are, but to realize that your loved one could be sitting in the chair or on the couch right next to you right now, just invisible to you, but they're willing to come through, so you don't
yes,
necessarily need to go to an outside source.
yeah. Plus, if you do it yourself, you can have ongoing communication. And some people have written whole books this way. I'm sure you're familiar with and I just went blank on her name.
That's okay.
The Billy Fingers book.
Yes. Afterlife of Billy Fingers. Yeah.
The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. That came because of her ongoing communication with her deceased brother. And other books have been written by women with their deceased husband, things of that nature, or their child, or I should say, and their child, and on and on and on. So people can have ongoing communication. But matter of fact, in our book, we encountered somebody who had ongoing communication with his deceased wife. But in a way, the most startling one, you asked me about what I heard that I remember. I remember walking into a bookstore here in Orlando, and just on the way in, I happened to meet a woman. We began talking, and she said, yes, she has ongoing communication with her deceased husband. And when she was young, I mean, she was like 30s or so, and she said that even though he has died, they talk daily because they had a business together, and he advises her on a daily basis of what to do to continue making the business a success.
Wow.
So even have that for a practical level of communication.
Yeah. A sensitive question here. I know you had lost your daughter in 2011. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because now you're on the side of being the grieving parent.
Okay. Well, my daughter, Janet, she was born in 1963. And right from the time she was a little girl, we knew she was very different, very artistic and all those things. But emotionally, her life was like a yo-yo, up, down, up, down, up and down and sideways. And you couldn't predict what would come next. And she lived her life that way. And unfortunately, in the late teens, she did get into drugs, cocaine. And that took well over a couple of years to get through. And I believe she was bipolar, although it wasn't ever officially recorded, and I didn't know enough to come forward and say it. But I think she was basically bipolar. And by the way, very, very high percentage of alcoholics are bipolar. And it's a way of using alcohol to gentle out the mood swings. If you're really nervous, you can't sleep and edgy and whatnot, you have a glass of wine or a beer, and that enables you to relax.
Yes.
And if you're bouncing off the ceiling on the upside and whatnot, you can drink something to bring you down. So same as with these drugs. Anyway, she had a difficult life emotionally, but she could paint, she could write, she could do theoretical mathematics, and did. She did ballet, and when she died, she was making a full-length feature film on her own.
Wow. And
before I go any further, I want to say her mother created a beautiful website to her, and it's called Janet, Jaenet. That's her name, Janet with an E in the middle.
Okay.
Jaenet.net.
Okay.
.net. And her books are on there, and the mother arranged it so everybody can read the books in full. You don't have to buy anything; it's all there, and you'll learn more about her. But basically, what happened was she met some man, and who convinced her she didn't need the medications she was taking, and she was on a lot of them. And so she went cold turkey.
Oh.
And went off everything at once. And she did tell her older sister that she thought she might resumed taking them because it wasn't working for her. Then I don't know what happened. There was a gap of a few days. She went into a Walmart store in Santa Fe, New Mexico, bought a handgun, walked out with it, because there's no waiting period in many states, and used it on herself within 2 hours. So I can only assume from what I've learned about suicide is that you feel that you're embarking on going into a downward spiral. Imagine this, a downward spiral, darker and darker, deeper and deeper, blacker and blacker, more and more isolated and alone. And no moment in your future life will be better than this. It will always be this way or worse as you continue this long, slow, downward spiral into emptiness. And I think that's the key word, emptiness. And you speak about clinical depression. This is clinical depression at its worst.
Sure.
But it is without treatment. There's situational depression, which we've all experienced because something has happened, a breakup of a marriage, or loss of a job, a health issue, whatever. But clinical depression is a whole different thing, and that's what she had there. But the good news is, not right away, but shortly thereafter, I heard from her, and she was much better. And over the period of time now, that was 2011, she took her life. And I've seen her once in a vision and spoken with her a number of times, and we communicate by telepathy. Sometimes I write it down, sometimes I don't. But I've received a lot of messages from her, and she's much happier, and she's together. She's working with children there. I'm going to call it heaven, call it the afterlife. I don't care what you call it. Same place. And she's much happier there than she ever was here. And I'm happy for her. And I can just feel her essence is, how could I put it, is so much lighter and more joyful than she was here overall. Yes, she was that way here sometimes too, but other times it was very hard to even speak with her. Very difficult. She was just that depressed and upset and everything.
When you've seen her, Bill, is it like you've seen her in the past, or does she look fresh and alive in your visions?
I saw her, an ADC vision, and that's a category, one of the 12 categories. You generally see them sort of like right in front of your third eye, as they call it, between your eyebrows and your forehead. So I didn't see her with my objective eyes, standing 3 feet away from me, as I would see you or you would see me, but right in front of me. And she was in full color. She was slowly turning her body, and then she was at the same time her whole body was going in a circle, twirling. And she was just showing me how happy she was by this mode of dance. And she looked radiant, full color. And the song I used to associate with her was playing. The song was the Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun.
Yes.
And it was my song with her. I have different songs with different people, but whenever I heard that song, I thought of sending her sunshine, that she was sad, depressed, whatever. But then what I learned by people who had written and posted messages on her website, and that she, for many other people, was their sunshine. She provided them with energy and creativity and encouragement. So it's all relative, isn't it?
Can songs be a form of after-death communication?
Yes, certainly. But we have many accounts of a particular song coming on at a particular moment. It could be an anniversary date or a birthday or whatever. It could be that station you never listened to on a radio, we'll say. Maybe you're saying last thing in the world is country western, but all of a sudden it's on the country western channel, and that's what you hear, and that's the song. And it usually totally surprises people when they hear it and where they hear it. Yes, definitely. Anything can be. There are two categories: one of physical phenomena, another one of symbolic experiences, and these kind of blur. But it's hard to describe them in words. But under physical phenomena, people who are bereaved often receive a wide range of signs such as lights or lamps blinking on and off,
Mm-hmm.
lights, radios, TVs, stereos, and other mechanical objects being turned on, photographs, pictures of various other items being turned over or moved from one place to another. And I wrote and a long list of things that go up in the night. It's so huge, so numerous, that it's those things you can't account for, but they occur. It could be a toy that begins operating even though the batteries aren't in it, the battery-operated toy, little car or something. It could be one that's in the book. It's a music box that operates that hasn't even been opened for years. Things like that. These are just physical phenomena. And then right now, the biggest thing in this field are what are known as signs. And so people know to ask a higher power or universe or see level for a sign, or not, they may not. And it's just something that occurs. And the most common ones involve rainbows, butterflies, and then many different species of birds and other animals, and things involving flowers or finding coins or feathers or pictures or whatever. But let's say with the birds, it's not just seeing a bird. It's having a bird come and land next to you or even on your finger,
right,
in some cases. It's not just having a butterfly being there and you're in a butterfly garden and having one land on you, indoor garden, but rather being outside and one comes to you, or you go outside, you see a whole swarm of them for a moment. It may not be a species you've ever seen before, and then it just is there for so many seconds and then dissipates. Or it may lead you, a butterfly may sort of dance in front of you if you're out walking in the woods or someplace, or a park, and lead you to a very special place. So again, it's the behavior of the animal. And we have other ones in the book that involve deer, porpoises, and other animals throughout.
Love it. One of the readers of my book, sorry to interrupt, I tend to do that, but he wrote to me and he said after his wife's funeral, a young wife who had passed away from cancer, he walked outside the church and it had not been raining and there was a full rainbow outside.
Yeah.
And then after that, he says, I just so miss you. I miss calling you and just saying hi, And he went out for a walk and he just happened to look up in the sky and there were no clouds in the sky except for clouds that spelt out hi, H-I with a little dot. And he took a picture of it and sent it to me. You got to believe that these signs are signs and they're real.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, you see, these things are all around us, but we've been trained not to see them almost. But they're there. Yes, they are there.
Yeah.
But we have this wonderful word, coincidence. Coincidence. And the skeptics use that constantly. Coinkydink. But there are no coincidences.
Oh, it's just beautiful.
It's purposeful.
Yeah.
It's purposeful.
Bill, time's going by quick. What haven't I asked you, or what should we talk about before we end
Well, I'd like
this?
to... one thing we didn't touch are what are the most common messages that people receive.
Oh, okay.
And the most common ones, and now these can be said verbally or just implied because of the experience. But they're letting us know. This is a deceased loved one saying to us, I'm okay, I'm fine, everything is okay, don't worry about me, don't grieve for me, I'm happy, everything will be all right, go on with your life. Because there's two parts of grief. One is our concern for the one who died.
Yes.
Do they still exist? How are they? And the other is for ourselves.
Sure.
I call it the death of a loved one, a spiritual or emotional, an emotional amputation. It's like losing a limb,
Yes.
an arm, a leg, or whatever, with a spouse or a child, and on and on. Sometimes they'll say, please let me go if we're clinging too hard, and some people do. Please forgive. They ask us to forgive somebody. There's a beautiful one of that in the back of the book. By the way, we have one chapter of longer accounts, and those are especially riveting and meaningful to read.
Okay.
They'll say, thank you. I'll always be there for you. I'm watching over you. That's sort of a, guardian angel kind of message. I'll see you again. I love you. And so I regard all of these are messages of love.
Yes.
And most of these, when you have an ADC, they reduce the intensity of the experiencer's grief, and they shorten the duration. of their bereavement. So, and then, as I say, there are 6 chapters of why are these real. We don't have time, I guess, to go through them all, but when you read those, I think even the more cynical people will be impressed by what they read and how these affected the lives of the people who had these experiences, because we have a whole chapter of people whose lives were protected or saved by an ADC, and another chapter of people who were suicidal and did not take their life because someone came at just the right moment.
Wow.
Not by what they said, but just why, when they were there, they caring was demonstrated, and they did not go on to were in the act of taking their life, by the way.
Really?
At the moment. Yes. So what we say is that ADCs are a natural and normal part of life, and
yes.
they deserve the same awareness that near-death experiences have received. And that basically that ADCs, after-death communications, provide modern-day evidence for life after death, and they confirm that what death is, it's simply that our body dies, but we make a transition to a spiritual realm, and we'll encounter our deceased relatives and friends, and that most of all, that after-death communications affirm that of the one very spiritual message, that life and love are eternal.
That's beautiful.
And that's the way, those are the final words of our book, Life and Love are Eternal, because that's what I learned from it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you had sent in your information you sent me before the information, there was a song that I heard on spiritlyric.com
Yes.
that I'm going to share with everyone. But can you tell a little bit about that song? It is so beautiful, and I think people find it so comforting.
It is, and I used to have copies available to give out or sell for $5,
mm-hmm.
things like that. But because of I don't know how to say it easily, a dispute she had with a union, she can't sell more than 5,000 or 10,000 copies or something.
Wow.
But she can't sell it. But people can listen to it as much as they want on the internet.
Yeah.
And until we're together again, it came through her. And this is a woman who doesn't play music. She can't sing. She's as musical as I am, which means zero, not at all. And she lives in the same town I do, Longwood, Florida.
Imagine
and
that.
She had never heard of me. She was trying to get this song to the medium John Edward,
mm-hmm.
but she did, but he didn't. She was hoping he would use it for his workshops, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. But it deserves to be played, and I want it recorded by children, and I want to have it recorded in all different languages. But
sure.
It just hasn't happened yet, and she's very busy. She's a young woman who has a very demanding job, and she's earning a living, and blah, 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 the material stuff.
I know all about that. Yeah.
I can't get her, quite pull her, even though offered her to pay for everything and do it. I can't quite pull her in the direction I'd like to make this possible, because it's such a lovely song. And it's the only song I know of that's an after-death communication in itself, because it's from the one who died.
Yes.
Almost all the other songs are to the one who died, or about the one who died.
Right.
This is from that person.
Incredible.
So it's you have the correct website, and people can play it there.
SpiritLyric.com, yeah. Or anyone who's listening right now, if you go to WeDon'tDieRadio.com and click on episode 143, that's this episode with Bill Guggenheim, and I'll have a link to his books, his website, this song, his daughter's website, everything we're talking about.
Yeah, it plays on our website if you push the right button someplace.
And your website is afterdeath.com?
Yes, but
yeah,
after hyphen death.
After hyphen death.com.
Right.
Excellent.
Without the hyphen, you don't get there.
You don't get there. Well, that's why I like if people.
But you see, afterdeath.com is after death. The way we spell it in the book is hyphenated, just like near-death experiences are hyphenated,
mm-hmm.
and the com is meant to be communications. So after-death communications.
Oh,
so it's just our way of being playful.
It's a good way of being playful. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah.
I'm thrilled to have spoken with you, and want to reread your book because it's been a number of years. But it's so true that when you start hearing stories of what other people have experienced, and then you have the courage to even share your own experiences, like, people looking around, that are around you in your life, you might think they're not into this stuff, but like I've found out, more people are than aren't. More people have had something happen than haven't.
I'm not bragging. It's not about me.
Okay.
This book has never been about me because if it was, I did let that go years ago. But it's been many years now since it came out in 1995. We self-published it in 96. Bantam bought it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for 21 years now, it's been on Amazon, and it's still selling well.
Yes, it is.
And I've heard people say, I bought a dozen, I bought 2 dozen, I bought even higher numbers. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I'm just saying many people have given this book at times of bereavement as they're wanting to give something, and this is what they've given because they know it helped them when they received it, and they want to help somebody else in the same way.
Yeah.
So I'm very pleased with that.
Yes.
It's a very easy. See, we wrote it in a very easy way. It's not a PhD book. It's a book anybody can read with any level of background.
Yeah, and they're short stories, 353 first-hand accounts all in one book. I mean, you can just pick up and read one, read a couple. The thing, Bill, that I really want to acknowledge you for, you and Judy both, is I know what grief feels like from the loss of my grandparent, my father, even some very close pets. I've not lost a child or a significant other, and I can assume the pain is severe. But to do anything that can help alleviate pain, give hope, stop suicide. So many people that are experiencing grief, are at their wits' end and actually feel like the best way out is to end their own life. You'll never hear all the stories of the impact your words and putting this book together has made in people's lives or the workshops that you've given. But I just want to thank you, really thank you, for doing all that you've done for mankind, and that this book will go on long after you're walking the planet, and it will continue to. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So just to conclude this episode, I want to thank you, Bill, for being here. I want to thank you, our listener, for spending this last hour with us. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I know your life is invested in this. And so I always want to give tools to make you or help you have a better life and give you hope. I want to encourage you to go to our website, which is wedon'tdieradio.com. Click on past episodes. You can join the Insiders Club, get a free copy of How to Survive Grief, a very healing audio I have. I want to remind you, September 15th through 17th, I'd love to meet you at that big symposium out in Scottsdale. And you can go to afterlifestudies.org. So in closing, my name is Sandra Champlain. I've been your host on We Don't Die Radio. And I do believe that life is an education for the soul and that your life here on earth is important. And what Bill said earlier really struck me, words from our loved ones. I'll see you again, and I love you. So know you are very, very loved. You are not alone. And I want to thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.